So it's live now.
Okay, we'll start.
I'll share the
Good,
link.
yeah. Good evening, and today at COA Social Reels, we are glad to have architect Shirish Beri with us today in conversation with Jayant. Uh, the context is his new book, Wanderings and Ponderings. I have a copy of the book. It's a wonderful book, and the book kind of records. It's more insightful, more reflective, a reflection of a search that Shirish has been in for many years now. Both, and it's not linked or it's not around buildings alone. It's a larger, broader perspective. The book, as I understand it, and Shirish would explain it in greater detail or share his insights in greater detail, has also reached all the schools of architecture. So I did receive uh, calls from various schools that they received the book and they're participating in this talk today. And the talk today would therefore reflect that journey. And it would begin with a presentation, maybe about 20 or 30 minutes by Shirish, and then followed by a dialogue with Jayan. Participants may post their thoughts, their insights on YouTube. And we have architect Lakshmi with us here from Bangalore, who will also be, after the dialogue, participating and bringing in the views of the various architects on board. We do have architecture schools from even Southeast Asia, Malaysia, and South Africa who have logged in to this program. Uh, and how we have looked at the COA Social Reads platform is that after this dialogue is really open to different schools of architecture and heads of schools to kind of engage with this dialogue and take it into the studios. So we have several heads of schools from Pune and Bhopal and Jaipur who have already expressed their wish to kind of take from this book and the dialogue and maybe explore a third year studio or a final year studio around themes and issues. And when they do it, they would invite both Shirish and Jayan for that studio as well. So there's an idea of percolation of the book. There's an idea of conversation much beyond this talk. So it is not about a 1 hour talk or a half an hour talk and a presentation and we are over with, but it's really a beginning of a larger conversation with schools of architecture. And we are very grateful to the council here, to the president, Mr. Habib Khan, for supporting this whole initiative to ensure that it's not only a book but develops a culture of kind of reflection, engagement, sketching, travel, writing, and where even the practitioners then now schools would have access to practitioners. So one aspect of the quarantine or the lockdown or whatever it's called is that a medium which was taken as a second medium till when we were in the studio has now become almost a primary or an equivalent medium. The online. I'm not saying it substitutes the real, but it has opened up its validity to involve in conversations in a studio, online, and more to inspire and provoke new thinking. I'm grateful to Shirish, who, despite I think a minor, I think that he would explain if he would like to. There was a minor emergency in the last 2 days, and despite that, insisted that he present today. In fact, I had suggested maybe we could move it by a week if required. He insisted and very bravely insisted that he will present today, and I'm grateful for that. And so I now invite Architect Lakshmi to introduce architect Shirish Beri, who's had a very long journey of writing, thinking, traveling, being with students. Introduce architect Shirish Beri, who would then present his book for about 20 minutes and then followed with a dialogue with Jack. So I will invite Lakshmi now to both introduce Shirish Beri and Jayant, and then architect Shirish would begin his presentation. Thank you again, everyone, for joining in, and thank you, Shirish and Jayant, for uh, coming onto this platform to connect with different schools and young artists. Thank
Good evening, everyone. Are you all able to hear me?
Can't see you.
Can't see me. Okay.
you.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. In which case, I'll have to move to this. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and it is my pleasure to introduce architect Shirish Beri. He's been trying to understand and explore the relevance of the quality of our outer physical space to the quality of our inner psychological space through his numerous path-breaking architectural designs. While working on tangible, measurable projects, he is constantly and intensely aware of the importance of the intangible, immeasurable values that are embedded as well as expressed in them. His search for wholeness in life initiated these wanderings and ponderings, those silent pauses and the friends which together have simultaneously contributed to his as an architect and as a person. Architect Jayant Dharap is a landscape architect and sculptor with over 30 years of experience. He is the founder of Forethought Design Consultants based in Pune, India. He started his career working with the eminent landscape architect firm Shahir and Associates in Delhi. In his current capacity, Dharap has worked on residential, commercial, environmental, and hospitality projects. His preoccupation with cartooning, doodling, and sketching during his college days developed into a keen interest in sculpting. He likes to work in metal and enjoys doing environmental sculptures. He is a keen traveler and a trekker. Jayant has worked with Shirish Beri first around 30 years ago when he had just set up his landscape architectural practice in Pune. At present, he is collaborating with Shirish on a project in Pune. Now, over to architect Shirish Beri to introduce his presentation. Uh,
Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm thankful to architect Habib Khan, architect Durganand, and the entire council team of Social Reads for giving me this opportunity to discuss my new book with all of you. I'm also thankful to Jayant for accepting the, um, this position of an interviewer as well as a moderator. Basically, you and I are on a unique journey called life. Rather, on many journeys within this main journey, every journey happens to be every journey happens to be simultaneously a journey into the outside world, our outer wanderings, encounters with people, places, as well as a journey within ourselves, which is interpreted by me as my ponderings, introspection, some new insights and understandings. And my wanderings here are expressed through my sketches, and my ponderings are expressed through my uh, poems. Can this be made bigger? Yeah. Excuse me. Can the image be bigger? It's okay. Or you can see me. You can also.
No, it's a full screen here.
Okay, it is a full screen there. Fine. Great. So, like to share a screen. Yeah, so I will take you on a short presentation in which we would go through these 5 chapters in my book and we talk about them. And maybe I would read a few poems or extracts from some poems while we go along. Next. Next. every time. So the first chapter is search. And I remember that in my late teens, many questions were crowding inside my brain and in my heart. Like, why is one alive? What is the purpose of one's life? What are values? Are they relative or absolute? How can one's daily actions and architecture relate to one's life values? Why is today's society with its injustice and inequity the way it is? How should I function in it? Is there an universal energy that resides in all beings and things? How and why does it operate in a certain way? Where do I stand in its scheme? All these questions were sort of making me restless. And most important question was, how should one lead one's life that will help in connecting one in the best possible way to this universal energy, nature, to the society, and to oneself? Till finally, this restlessness and longing caused by these questions reached a certain pitch which it was difficult to handle. I was studying in third year architecture in SEP that time, and I was sitting under one of those big neem trees, and I was pondering. And then I thought that it was very essential for me to take a pause in my life now and try to find answers to some of these questions. So I went and told my parents that I want to take a drop in architecture for 1 year. So my parents were a little surprised, shocked. They said, "Oh, you're doing so well in your studies here and all that. Why do you want to take a drop?" And I told them the reasons, various reasons and all that. But finally, we um, met at a compromise. Compromise that I said that then okay, then every vacation I would like to be by myself. So then every vacation I would come home, do some perspective views for my father, make some money from the perspectives which I did, and start on my wanderings. So I would wander for about a month and a quarter, 4 to 5 weeks at a time. So roughly during the year, I would have about two such wanderings. One maybe around month or less, one maybe a month and more, something like that. And so that's how it started. Now these journeys were not meant to escape the daily life, but rather to immerse oneself deeper into life's workings. This was a much sought after period for self review and critique, reassessment of my values and priorities in order to live a holistic, wholesome, and fulfilling life. My travels then were done on real shoestring budget. This was in the early 70s when I would live on about 10 to 15 rupees a day was my budget, kind of 15 rupees a day. And I used to sleep on beaches or in temples or mosques. I even slept on slept on park benches 3 4 times, and or sometimes I used to stay in dormitories or terraces of lodges because they were cheaper than the rooms. And food was also like whatever I got, I would have eat. And my evening meal was like some coconut or peanuts and maize or something like that. Uh, and all through these travels, I seemed to trust the intrinsic goodness of all human beings and animals. I was never robbed or assaulted anywhere during these travels. There always was an element of mystery and surprise when I wandered around in this manner. These wanderings have taught me many things. They have taught me to accept life and its events as they unfolded. They have taught me patience to give these events their own time to unfold. They also taught me tolerance towards these events, which could unfold in any manner whatsoever. During these wanderings, I also learned to live with the unpredictable and with the insecurity it breeds. I could overcome this figure of insecurity that is so common in our society today. They also taught one endurance, physical as well as psychological. Living with bare minimum needs on minimal provisions during these journeys also became a habit with me. Simplicity during travel became a way of life spontaneously. I attempted to record these wanderings and ponderings through my jottings and sketchings. Regarding sketching, I would like to quote Henri Cartier-Bresson, who himself was a great photographer, as we all know, he said that photography is an immediate reaction, whereas drawing is a meditation. These are some of the sketches which I did when I was in school, out in about 8th or 9th class. But these are all copies, and later on I started doing on-the-spot sketches. This is a poem that I wrote when I was 22 years old. It's called The Call. The Call. I continue walking along the parallel rails, still believing that they would meet somewhere. They seem to meet at the horizon, but the further I walk, further moves the horizon. I go on with the firm conviction that the irreducible distance between me and the horizon would shrink sometime, somewhere. This is still going on. Some poems and this thing is search. Then we come to the second chapter, which is travel. This is my relationship with places, with architecture, with monuments, with nature also, but nature is coming later on. So this is mainly my relationship with places. And during these wanderings, a realization crept in that I had learned to listen to what different places had to say. Wherever I went, I would be quiet, stay there, and the places would start talking to me. They would start revealing their secrets to me. As an architect, there was something worth learning and emulating from these places, from the vernacular as well as the monumental. Most of them were direct, honest responses to their multiple contexts, with that wonderfully appropriate spatial quality, an awesome presence that seemed to touch some inner universal chord in me. This happens only sometimes while experiencing today's modern architectural spaces. I've tried to include my contemporary interpretations of these learnings in my work. My first poem here is called Pilgrimages. People ask me, like, how come you have not been to Tirupati as yet? Not even to Sabrimalai, nor the Kumbh Mela. Oh, then you must have visited Futtaparthi or the Dargah in Ajmer. No. How about Makkah and Lourdes? Not been there either. No pilgrimages. What about your salvation? People ask me. I feel confused, as I do not understand what they mean. For me, this entire life journey has been a pilgrimage. Everything and every place appears to be sacred to me. Coming to my lake house at Andur is a pilgrimage. The lake, the hills, the forest, its animals, my house, all are sacred. Getting back to my city house, to my family is similar. A visit to my sites with their sacred soil, trees, bricks, gravel, and wood is the same. Living a good, honest, contented, happy life is in itself my prayer and affirmation of the universal energy. Going to orphanages, old people's homes, and hospitals to help the poor and needy are also pilgrimages of different kind. Enriching a derelict, barren environment with trees and healthy human activity is another kind of worship. Relinquishing and giving to the unprivileged have-nots are our ahutis and pujas, my rituals in this pilgrimage of life. So is my work as an architect, writer, painter, an act of worship, a tribute to this wonderful life. But as an architect, so many places of pilgrimage come to my mind where I go to pay my respects, from where I seek inspiration. Here are a few of them. We'll just go through them. Kailash Temple, Padmanabhapuram Palace, Fatehpur Sikri, Alhambra, Hagia Sophia, Sagrada Familia, the Shore Temple in Mamalapuram, the Adalas Stepwell, Mandu, Jaisalmer, the Greek island where I spent a few days, Petra in Jordan, Stonehenge, and the Roinji temple courtyard. Many such places act as some kind of energy centers for me, recharging my creativity and inspiring me to do better, making me more humble, down to earth, and humane. Unlike today's vulgar, greedy, commercial, religious pilgrimage places, they seem to be blessing me, without expecting anything in return. To receive their blessings, I must be empty. This is about cities and minds, how they are similar to each other. I find that traversing the streets, lanes, and bylanes of any human settlement is so much akin to traveling the ways and alleys of our collective mind. Isn't the city a macrocosm of our mind? Here are some poems about ruins for which I have a great fascination. This is Angkor Thom. Then we come to the third chapter, which is society and people, which talks about which is an expression of my relationship with today's society and its people. The enigma for society and its functioning was something that I always wanted to explore. I kept feeling there was something wrong, something amiss. What I observed seemed to be at loggerheads with the perennial humanitarian values as well as my rationale whatsoever. Our task must be to free ourselves from the prison of misconception of me, myself, and mine by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its bounty. Because this misconception breeds greed, selfishness, intolerance, hatred, and violence. Thus, my response to the overall social norms, behavior, and creations has also been different at different times, at different places. From Because some societies are good, some societies are medium, some societies are violent or don't function very humanely. So my responses have been from anger, frustration, sadness, and desire to change all, to that of pacifist tolerance, acceptance, and even appreciation. One has learned so much about life, what to do and even what not to do from this variety of people. Wide variety of people, from small playful kids to elderly wise people, from an uneducated manual laborer to a university scholar, from rational formal businessmen to intuitive informal artists, from cruel inhuman politicians to compassionate humane individuals. The list can go on. This is a page which talks about the changing values and thus the changing landmarks. Earlier, our changing landmarks, the landmark in any town is in Europe would be a church steeple or would be a temple in the city. All other houses would be small, the temple would be big. But in years gone by, the major landmark towering above any town was always the temple or the church or the mosque, expressing the importance of religion for its people. Now, when we visit any town or city, the tallest building landmark is a bank, an office, or a hotel, expressing the importance of finance and commerce for its people. A clear, perceivable shift in human values from sanctity to celebrity. Once, many years ago, now more than 40 years ago, almost 45 years ago, I was sitting at an airport in Guwahati, I guess, and a butterfly came and sat next to me on the arm of my chair. So I found that amusing. So I started a conversation with the butterfly. My dear butterfly, why did your exquisitely beautiful wings get you into this dull waiting lounge at this airport? Have you missed your way? Or have you lost your senses like us? The new speed will only bring about discontentment and craving to go further without seeing what is near you, to go faster with blurred, vague objects around you. The heady heights would have no flowers to offer you. The new lands would only stimulate desire to visit more new lands. All this would disrupt your natural harmony, innocence, and you might no longer remain a butterfly from your natural, but being taken away from and further away from your natural self, you may evolve into a miniature man. So in society, many times what happens is people they want you to fall into a cog. I mean, they have. I mean, they want you to conform to a certain way of life, certain way of thinking, certain way of this thing. So in that matter, I had written this poem, Madness, which is dedicated to Zorba the Greek. Nikos Kazantzakis wrote Zorba the Greek long many years back, and it's true story. And in that, Zorba asked Nikos, You got everything except one thing. So Nico says what? He says madness. Man needs some madness, or else he never dares cut the rope and be free. Yes, Zorba, madness is the spark of life, the spirit of freedom, the breath of fresh air. In this routine conditioned, claustrophobically stagnant atmosphere, madness that always creates, innovates, improvises, for others to scorn, mock, ridicule, and then belatedly follow. By then, a new madness starts, bubbling with life energy, with the intense desire to express, to manifest, to be. Madness is the end of hypocrisy. Madness is the courageous beginning of spontaneity. Madness is to be free, free to love, to shout, to sing, to dance, to cry, to abandon oneself, to let go is to have. There are some very fine things, but which have been lost. Like in the Saudi Arabian scriptures, uh, this is about that. I'll just read it. Most emperors, kings, and politicians, even after their death, have indulged in further monumentalizing their already monumental egos with expensive, elaborate, and huge pyramids and mausoleums and cenotaphs. How refreshing to read that according to the scriptures, the Saudi king, after his death, is supposedly covered in a plain cloth and buried in an unmarked grave to anonymously disappear, unnoticed in the vastness of the desert. So beautiful a thought, an idea, but it's not being followed at all. So then I'd also written something about the Bhils and their lifestyle and how I stayed with them also in their habitat. So far away from our coveted civilization, with its facilities of health, education, finance, and public utilities. They're so far away from all this, but they are also so far from its government's laws and controlling mechanisms. But they are with lesser health problems, lesser crime, and more humane energy to tackle each day differently. Isn't that amazing? It always makes me ponder as to what we are doing to ourselves. Wouldn't a simpler, more spontaneous, less administered, less technology dependent, and more natural life be more healthy, peaceful, and happy? This chapter is about my relationship with nature. Actually, one writes about nature separately only for the sake of conventional convenience, as it is very difficult, rather impossible, for one to separate oneself thus from nature and write about it. Especially while sketching in nature, I have experienced the dissolution of the subject object duality between me and nature. We go on disturbing the natural cycles and ecosystems of our short-sighted, selfish, for our short-sighted, selfish goals to such an extent that ultimately nature will have no other alternative than to seek its own balance at the cost of human welfare and well-being. My relationship with nature has been an enriching, multisensory, and holistic one. I have sensed it with my whole being, my body, my mind, and my heart simultaneously. Besides this multisensory rapport, there always has been a deeper rapport of empathy between me and all forms of nature, a kind of invisible, inaudible communication from both sides that was received and responded by both. These outbursts of empathy are difficult to put in words, but are just fascinating to experience. When I was in Ladakh, I had written this poem and this sketch. Here in the remote regions of Ladakh, I hear silence. Silence in its flowing waters is howling winds, even in their Buddhist gong and in their chanting. I see silence on its snow-clad mountains, on the green prairies with their yaks, and on those landscapes of erosion. I smell the silence in the wild flora and in the air blowing through the pines and in the incense burning in their temples. I taste silence in their apricots and momos and in its crystal clean spring waters. I feel the silence in its ancient, beautiful monasteries and shartams and on the placid, tranquil, mirror like lakes. That's when a part of this silence enters my being, reaches, touches, and becomes that silence that was once lost within me. I have also written certain haikus, very short haikus, but we can go ahead. This was a poem which deals with society as well as nature. Most countries boasted of their 6 lane, 8 lane highways, flyovers, and bridges. True indicators of progress and development, they said. Exploitation of nature, its resources, and their stupendous energy consuming processes do not matter. They do not matter as long as they have their speed and that make believe prosperity. Whereas one country, in my travels, I found that whereas one country boasted of its 2 lane roads with their intermittent third overtaking lane, one way bridges at a slower, relaxed pace, conservation of nature and its wilderness, its biodiversity, its precious resources, and finite energy are all that matter for a holistic, natural, contented life in New Zealand. And then comes my final chapter with my relationship with my own self. There were a number of occasions during my wanderings when I would lose my separate identity to gel with whatever I was experiencing. It could be the mountains or the sea, the old man or that child, that barking dog or the singing bird, even that palace or this hut. This would happen without any intention or premonition, suddenly and spontaneously, irrespective of any conditioning or identification with any country, religion, region, language, age, gender, and species. The spontaneous, subconscious, natural fallout of this holistic state and attitudes in life have been these 5 crucial, indispensable guiding dimensions in my life. I have lived by and I have uh, by these 5 dimensions. One is oneness and empathy with nature, with the realization that we are its integral part. Second is compassion for everyone, as all are part of this wonderful unity of life, inequity and life. Uh, then voluntary simplicity with Sayam happens when one experiences the fullness of life. Honesty and truthful living, as the need for untruth, manipulation disappears. Silence and solitude, to abide in that fullness when the muck of thoughts settles down. My life directions, actions have always been guided by these 5 dimensions. They are my heart's true calling, which have evolved from my understanding of this world. Thus, decision making for me is extremely easy and smooth as I heed the advice of these 5 friends. Any decision that would enhance and add value to these 5 dimensions is accepted and taken forward. Anything that hampered or devalued any of these 5 dimensions would be rejected, however tempting it might be. Many a times I have been called crazy by the society at large for my priorities and behavior in life. The question is whether we always need to adjust with this society by thinking and acting according to its written, unwritten norms. And that too to a corrupt, dishonest, and hypocrite society. On this, Krishnamurti ji puts it very beautifully. He says that it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Living my life in this constant company, the constant company of these five intangible friends, there has not been a single boring moment in my life. The immeasurable and the intangible has occupied a more important place in my life as compared to the measurable and the tangible. I completely agree with Einstein when he says, not everything that can be counted in life really counts. Everything that can be counted in life really counts. These are some more poems, but I don't know whether is there. Do we have time, Lakshmi? Nah.
Yeah, you can.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes. Yeah. Okay. It's about stillness. My own kind of these last chapter has my own experiences and my values, life values, and all that. Mind is movement, with thoughts always restless. I've always felt that. Only the center is motionless. Desire is movement, with the urge for having. Only love is unmoving. Time is movement, the past, present, future tussle. Only now is eternal. All is always now. Love is here and now. Stillness is here and now. There's a small poem and offering. Life is one full, wonderful, continuous offering, always offering us something through everything, even through pain and conflict. Drowning in this fullness and wholeness of life, I joyfully become the offered and the offering. It's a great state to be in, where one is the offered and the offering, one is the subject and the object. Another thing very important in our lives is what shapes our priorities in life. All these five elements that we talked about, five dimensions which we talked about, they are the ones which shape my priorities in life. I've written this poem long back. It's just a matter of priorities to own 5 square feet of commercial space in Nariman Point in Mumbai, or 5 acres of natural wilderness in the Konkan. Both cost the same. Isn't it a matter of choice to join the money making rat race in your imported air conditioned, air freshened BMW on the busy, noisy, neon lit high street? Or withdraw onto the slow lane with shady trees and chirping birds, working with love, joy, and compassion? Both the possibilities are always open. I seem to have opted for the latter one. I, because of this feeling of being an integral part of this wholeness of life, I always had this feeling of empathy towards everything around. Why do I feel satiated when the plants are watered after a long dry spell? Why is it that I feel free and happy when our dog is untied? What makes me bubble within at the sight of a bubbling, frothing stream or waterfall? Why does a feeling of weightlessness engulf me at the sight of that bird's lovely flight? And being in this oneness of life, there's a small poem here which I'd penned because something like that happened to me once when I was in Andaman. A wandering cloud wanders in the blue sky, plays with the wind and sky, becomes the wind and sky. No cloud left. The water over the stir boils, plays with the heated air, becomes heat and air. No water left. Watching this, I become the cloud, I become the water. No Shirish left. Now I have stayed whenever I was not wandering also because I wandered because I wanted that pause, I wanted to be by myself. But even otherwise, I've always had a place of retreat right from the beginning. Like after graduation, my father had kept aside some money for my uh, MArch in Harvard and MIT. But instead of that, I told him to give me that money. And with that money, I built this house at the edge of the Sahyadris, at the end of edge of the mountain. And I lived there, and I lived there with in the solitude with nature, and it was great. I mean, I think I did learn a lot there by sitting there and designing uh, than what I think I would have learned in a by sitting in an air-conditioned classroom abroad, working on a problem with different context. This was my place of path. I managed to bathe under this waterfall. My second place of retreat was in Konkan, amidst this bit between these large mango trees at Nadavde. And the third one later, they were not all at the same time. Then I would give that away and then make this. This was at the beach in Devgarh, my beach house, where again the poems there are related to my experience at Devgarh. This is my present place at Andur. It's a lake house. It's on the lake, about 1 hour's drive from Kolhapur, where I have bisons and sambars and wild boars as visitors. This is my house in Kolhapur, which we constructed out of the waste materials. It has its own rainwater harvesting tank. It has solar energy, and it tries to be as independent as possible, as self-sufficient as possible, as eco-friendly as possible. And then after these places, the last poem is on and where do I wish to dwell now? And this uh, poem is stirred by some of Kabir's dohas and Kabir's words, like Agamgar, Nijadiketan, and Nirboli, and all that. So, would I like to live in a radical, assertive, judgmental society? Or would I like to live in that space between yes and no, between right and wrong? Would I live in the designated, classified forms with nomenclatures? Or would I rather live somewhere between that form and emptiness? Would I succumb to excessive consumption? Or would I dwell happily between consumption and renunciation? And the questions continue, the search continues. And I realize that even after all these wanderings and travels, the longest exploratory journey that I have embarked upon is from my head to my heart. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation that gave an insight into your journey and also the book simultaneously. And now I would invite Jayant to open a conversation with you, and then later Lakshmi would come in with her questions as well as the questions from the participants that the participants would be sending to her, and we can broaden the dialogue. So I would now invite Jayant to initiate the conversation, dialogue, and liberty to take it in any direction that the two of you all wish. I think it's a wonderful occasion to reflect and think. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you, Durganand. And thanks to COA for organizing this. I must say on a personal note that the many times that I have gone through this book, even now listening to Shirish read out some part of it, it's again the same sort of thought processes in my mind, and the same same things go on in my mind. And I realized that in my connect with Shirish for the past 30 odd years, Shirish Beri the architect, Shirish Beri the wanderer, the ponderer, the thinker are all sort of molded into one. So when he talked to us about the book, and I had a chance to see some initial sort of clippings of it, I think that it would be interesting to ask Shirish to talk about the journey of the book in itself. So Shirish, can you share some insight into the journey of the book? This is a kind of a treasure of stuff that you have kept together for last almost 5 decades, from age of like 20 plus to now. And over 5 decades, one of the most important things that all architects should note is that this treasure is with you because you have kept it together and you have kept it properly. Whether it is a sketch or whether it is a poem or whether it is your thoughts and ideas. So, can you just tell us about the journey of the book?
Okay. the the book's journey has been in my mind for many years. Like I won't, because the first time I visited the United States and Europe. Europe I visited earlier, but then this was in 1993 when I was invited to speak at Princeton. At that time, I felt that whatever I was experiencing, I put it in a long poem and called it Wanderings and Ponderings that time. But then later, I thought it can have a wider perspective and a wider scope and relate to my life values, my life and the travels, actual travels. So this pandemic gave me the right kind of a pause and the right kind of time to work upon it. And when because these sketches were already scanned and kept in my on my PC or my laptop, and the poems were also there. So I would spend most of the time during the day in trying to put these sketches and poems together in a certain thematic journey. Now, basically, the idea for making this book is sharing. Like I would like to, with the medium of this book, I would like to share my journey to a lot of known unknown with lot of known unknown people, and also I would be to happy if they share their journey with me, and that together, the sharing of each other's life journeys may together enrich each other's lives to some extent. Yes.
Because uh, I was almost about to ask you the question why the book, but you've already that. But I can't help wondering that you were a student around the 70s, and through your entire work or through your entire sort of reactions to things, and through your entire mindset, there doesn't seem to be any tangible or even intangible connect to a Western thought or Western philosophy or any kind of. So did you go through the process of looking at some Western philosophy when you were a student or when you were younger, or how did that sort of happen? Can you share that with us?
Actually, there have been different influences at different times. Like when I was in second year, Ayn Rand's Fountainhead was an
Right.
influence. It was temporary, but it had a great experience. This thing influence. While I was in third year, I was always uh, my mind. There was always this constant question in my mind about values in life, whether these values are relative or whether they are absolute. So that is when I really started exploring Western philosophy. And I started from Socrates and Plato and Socrates, and then came down to Kierkegaard and Heidegger, and later right up to Jean-Paul Sartre in his existential philosophy. So basically, I was trying to find answers to this, and then I kept searching. And so then one day I was sitting in the library, SEPT library, and I took up the book from the library shelf. It was just coincidence and destiny, I guess. And I took out that book. It was a book of the Upanishads. And I read in that where the disciple is asking, what is it that which when known, everything is known? And the Guru replies, Guru or Yama, I think, replies in Kathopanishad. He replies, that art thou, because thou art everything. And I just sat down there, in the chair. Suddenly something flashed inside me, and in my brain and mind. I sat there. I said, "Oh, this is it." So why have been have I been beating about the bush for so long? And then from there onwards, I started studying more of Eastern philosophy, the Hindu, the upper Advaita philosophy, the Upanishads, the Vedanta, and also at the same time I studied Sufism because Sufi philosophy is very close to my heart also. Zen Buddhism, Zen, which is also similar, and also some Christian mystics, which who also talk about the same thing in different ways, and that gave me a kind of a greater understanding of life. And then I also used to go and stay in these places, do these wanderings. And one of my wanderings, I even stayed in a Zen monastery in the forest in Japan. So there is a combination of Western and Eastern, but the greater influence is that of the Eastern philosophy.
So, do you think your work also has some kind of a connect with either the Western or an Eastern thought process, or maybe the materiality or the simplicity, or what have you? In retrospect, do you think you could?
Yes, in terms of the uh, planning, in terms of the circulation, planning, and all that, the Western mindset helps because it's very rational, very efficient, and very clear cut, which is also important and needed in architecture. But at the same time, the the irrational, the immeasurable approach of the East is also expressed through my landscape, through the built form, and through the pauses and the spaces inside the building. So it's a combination.
Okay. One of the thoughts that occurred to me there is that, and this is part of what I have experienced in my discussions with you over the many years, that retreat and solitude, out of the five intangible friends that you indicated, silence, retreat, and solitude are something which are very powerful. And I don't think it's very easy for many of us to go into retreat, or to experience silence and solitude. So can you touch upon how silence, solitude, and retreat has helped you in your thought process or in your work? So I'm just trying to establish a connect with your work.
It is possible to experience silence even in a dense urban city in one's room also, but for a short while. But if I wanted to experience it for a longer period of time, uh, then I thought a retreat like the Gagan Bada or the Nadade, the four retreats that I showed you in the end. And those have played a very important role in my life. If they were not there, I wouldn't be the person I am today. Because I have, they are like my refueling stations, or they're recharging stations. Like when a mobile battery is down, you have to charge it. So when my battery is down, or when I am down, I have to recharge myself from nature's silent energy. And nature's silent energy has that potential to recharge me and rejuvenate me. And that helps me in my work also because most of my designs are done designing is done at these places because there is no disturbance there and I can work at any odd time during the day or night, and there's no fixed timing as such, and there is silence there.
So, in continuation with this, these five intangible friends, oneness and empathy with nature, compassion for everyone,
Yes.
Sanyam or simplicity, and honesty and truthful living. I think these are very powerful sort of guidelines that you have followed till now. In the same way that you indicated about silence and solitude, can you maybe explain, maybe narrate some perhaps event in your life which very clearly has had these five friends have had a bearing on the decisions that you have made.
Yes. Uh, let's say in my profession itself, uh, fortunately, touch wood, I have been able to choose my clients. I mean, clients choose their architects, yes, in one way, but then the architect also can choose his clients. So, one of the reasons why I've refused 3 jobs out of 5, I've accepted 2 or sometimes 3 maybe, is because I wanted to be close to nature. I wanted to have my periods of pause and silence and reflection. And these were the reasons why I did not take up more jobs. Another reason why I could do so was because my lifestyle is very simple, and I don't need so much money to sustain myself. I can say no to clients also. I can say no to certain temptations, and still live a happy, fulfilled life. Uh, so that is one thing. Secondly, as far as compassion goes, like on my 60th birthday, instead of having a big bash celebration here for Exhausti and all that, I disappeared for a retreat for about 10 days. I told my family that I'm going, and I went for a retreat in the wilderness. And there I thought about things, what have I done so far, and what are the things that really are a matter of concern for me, and what should I do in future. So that is the time when I decided to write my first book also, and which was published later, 2 3 years later. And that was the time when I understood that I was feeling quite uneasy with the inequity and the injustice in the society. So I was wondering what I could do from as my small share to reduce this inequity and injustice because of the compassion that I felt for everyone around. So when I came back, I put most of my savings in an account and called it the Humane Equity and Dignity Fund. I created this fund to for the needy people as well as for the needy environment as well as uh, yes, mainly for the needy people, health wise, education wise, and environment wise. And we've been spending money for that on that. Even the house, our ancestral house in Kolhapur was sold, and the money which I got from that was put in this fund to enrich this fund so that it could do more activity like that. This fund also created a small fellowship which I give for uh, give to 3 graduating architects in the country. Like 2 are from Kolhapur because I have indebted to the city, and one graduating architect is from SEPT because I'm indebted to SEPT for whatever it has given me during those years. And this fellowship is also to give them an idea of this pause because I give this fellowship for them to do nothing. So they do nothing. I don't want them to join a mediocre office and get stuck there. Or I don't want them to rush to a master's PG program. But I want them to take a pause in their lives. Maybe travel, maybe write, maybe make a film, maybe make music or whatever. But take a pause in their life to ponder about their values, what are their values and how architecture, what kind of architecture can they do where they can have maximum satisfaction. So this, some of these principles which I've talked about are experienced also by these fellows who get this fellowship. So that is there. And then honesty and what was that? Truthfulness, honesty, honesty and truthful living.
Absolutely.
I guess when one realizes that one is an integral part of this fullness of life, this fantastic, life that is there, then then why should I be dishonest or untruthful or manipulative? because my need to get more and have more, you know, is reduced because I feel the fullness within me. Because I feel the fullness within me, I don't feel like being dishonest or untruthful. So that is simple like that. And simplicity, one simplicity and Sayam is simplicity is not a forced simplicity. It happens when you reach the true essence of things. When we understand the true essence of life and things, then you automatically, spontaneously come towards something very simple, and less complex and less indulgent. So, in spite and voluntary simplicity is very important. Like, in spite of our being able to indulge in so many uh, consumeristic goods and luxuries, can we uh, can we use that money for something else better and live a simple life? Simplicity, I think, gives us tremendous freedom in life. That's what I have experienced. If one lives a simple life, one has tremendous freedom. Like I was telling you about not doing a particular job or doing a particular job or doing it in a particular way, the freedom to do it in a particular way. That also happens.
So, in continuation with this, I believe one of the axioms of working with teams has always been don't give in or give up. And have you had an occasion when you have been forced to take an unsavory decision, or how would you react to such a decision, or how would you react to a situation like that? So it's either dictate, give in, or don't give up.
Situations are there. Some situations are there like that, but there are not many, because initially itself I have been choosy with the client. I have tried to see that our wavelengths meet somewhere, our priorities in life are similar, so that the design decisions become simpler and easier. But there are cases, like many places, many times the client is not a single individual client, but many times when I'm doing institutes or there are corporate clients, the chief or the main person keeps changing. And when the main person changes, the values change. And when the value change, it's a little difficult to work on it. But there are some cases where I realized later that the priorities of these institutions were very different from mine. So I have kind of blacklisted them and don't work for them anymore. Because my happiness in work is more important than, you know, dragging and continuing an unsavory relationship, professional relationship.
Okay, great. So, a very powerful line that stayed with me is that the longest journey I've embarked upon is from my head to my heart. And in context of how you work, or how you start working on a site, or how you address a site, or how you sort of design, can you sort of broaden the take this narrative a little further for us?
Basically, for me, head and heart are two metaphors. Head is kind of a metaphor for the measurable, tangible, rational. And the heart is the metaphor for the immeasurable, intangible, or irrational. And in architecture, it is very important to strike the right dynamic balance, not just the ordinary balance, but a dynamic balance between these two, between the measurable and the immeasurable. So, when I visit a site, the measurable part of the site, the head part, are the are things which can be measured, the contours, the site which I see, and all that, and the strata available, and number of trees, and all that. But the immeasurable part that strikes me at any site is the kind of rapport I develop with the site as a whole, the empathy that I develop with the site and with the trees there or with the rocks there. And I try to listen to them, and then many of my designs are shaped from that. Like, I don't know how I can explain it without my slides, but let's say the Hyderabad project with those big rocks. They were at the corner of the edge of the site where I couldn't have done anything. They would have been there in the setback line. But then I requested my client to get that piece of land in exchange of a better piece of land on this side. So the farmers were happy. I was happy. I got some more land on the other side of the rocks, and I sat there on the side. I think it's very important for architects, especially now the young architects, to develop that rapport and relationship with the site. Very important, and that is why I stayed on the site for 3 days. I had my studio set up under those rocks on a table, and the food used to come to me, used to get me the food and the water and all that. And I would sit and work, and then every time I would check around, go around and see how it was going to fit on that site. And sometimes there I have even just hugged those the rocks there for some time. Just listen to them and just felt them, and their million-year-old vibrations to sort of get some inspiration as to how I could design. So these are important, and this is the hard part. The head part is also important, and hard part is also important.
So, in continuation with your site experience or your connect with the site, have there been any projects where there are no drawings made, or where it is like the design is figured out on site and in tandem or to and fro, put on the drawing and then figured out on site and put on the drawing, something like that?
That is a different mode of working. Like I normally work in a mode where I visualize uh, what I want. But in order to convey that visualization to the contractors and to the clients, I take the help of drawings. So in most cases, drawings are made with the visualization of what they would be. Otherwise, today, many architects can finish the whole job with only one drawing or two drawings. So that should not become an excuse for not making drawing. But the other way is also good if you're doing very few projects. If you're doing just a few projects, and if you have a greater involvement on the site, then making less drawings and doing a lot of impromptu decisions and design decisions on the site will work. Like that has worked with me for my own houses, because I was the client, I was the contractor, I was the architect. So it has worked there because I could, I didn't have to show it to anybody or convince somebody about it before putting it on site. But I could, whatever I had in mind, if on the site there was something else happening there, I could change the shape form also, because it was I who was going to live there, and because I had that much time to see that it was executed in the right manner without the drawings.
So, an interesting question occurred to me, that if you were not to become an architect, what would you have become?
Uh, Anything, I think anything, I I would do anything that would make me a better human being. It may be music, it may be painting, it may be architecture, it may be agriculture, but uh, which would not take away my humanness, where I would be able to still be a good human being and work. So but as I said, music would be one of the important areas where I could, where because it's very abstract and it is very universal. The language is universal, so it would be-
So I remember watching the first sort of rushes of a film that you have been working on. So what is the stage of that film? Is it up or is it completed?
the the film is called Uru the Space. It is a 29-minute documentary, which is complete. But I don't know, my co-director and all that, he's trying to send it to different festivals and maybe for the national awards or whatever. So I don't know whether we can release it before that. So maybe we are just holding on it for some time because the book has also come at this time, the film will come at this time. So I didn't want to, bring both together at such a short interval. So the film will come and it will be available. The link would be available on some platform. We have not decided which one soon. And I think it talks about space and how insensitive we have become to space. And this film is made to sensitize not only architects but common people to space and the quality of space and its importance in our lives. How an outer space, the quality of outer space, can change the quality of our inner space. So I'm quite excited about it. It's going to be um, out soon. It will be out soon.
Okay, Lakshmi, thank you very much, Shirish. Lakshmi, over to you. And it was great talking to you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thank you, Jen. Mute. You're on mute.
Lakshmi, you to unmute.
So there are a bunch of questions that have come in, and I'll start asking them, and you can respond to those. So, is wandering and up and leave kind of a situation, or is it rooted? What are your thoughts on that?
Can you repeat? Wondering what kind
So
of.
is wandering a kind of an up and leave situation where you have the facility to sort of pack your bags and put your shoes and leave, or what is the psychological or physical rootedness of these wanderings?
It is both. I mean, it has the freedom. Like whenever I traveled, I did travel with a lot of. It was the whole entire program was not fixed. If I liked the place, I would stay there for a longer time. And during those days, there was no mobile or telephone connectivity was not very good. So I used to write letters to my parents and say that I'm okay, and that's all. And basically, it is rooted in. The wanderings are rooted in certain basic values and principles of that pause and silence that I could get during these travels to question myself, to criticize myself, to reassess myself, and to and normally after these wanderings, my life would deviate a little bit. I mean, it would change the direction a little bit to because of the assessment, my own self-assessment. And wanderings were good in many ways, because they taught me so many of these things which I discussed earlier. But at the same time, they uh, showed me how people in different parts of the world lived. Earlier, when I was wandering, I used to feel a lot of difference, and the differences were felt more. And recently, I mean, in the past few years, I've been noticing that the commonalities are more. From a person in China and a person in America or in Africa, I started noticing the commonness, the same human nature that is in all of them, but that it is expressed in slightly different ways because of the culture and the society.
So
So it is.
the follow-up question was you can build on this if I ask that question as well. So So, ponderings or deep theological and philosophical ideas that you've sort of gathered from different cultures. Do you see a common thread between them, and do you delineate how that translates into ideas of space and architecture, either universally, or do you think that they translate or express themselves in different ways?
Long question, sir. Mm,
So, because
yeah,
you mentioned different theological standpoints in
yeah,
philosophy,
they were
I
there, but at,
they ask if there is a common thread of an idea of space.
sure.
Yeah, that's the question.
There's definitely a perennial philosophy that underlies most of the important uh, philosophers in this world. Some stresses are different in different places, but the underlying philosophy is the same, and the underlying spatial experience in different cultures it may be a little different, but at the same time the underlying spatial experience and the spatial expression is also similar. There is a certain underlying thread that binds all of them. You can take any church or any temple as such or any mosque as such, think of the grandeur, the scale. Of course, there are some temples in our Konkan and coastal areas which are very different. But those are cultural kind of variations. But on the whole, generally, it is like that. And everywhere, I think, uh, things like values like love, friendship, honesty, and simplicity maybe and these are valued everywhere in the world,
Right.
and
Right.
so non-violence also to some extent is valued everywhere, though each country is making so many weapons now and spending so much money on that, but still basic in my wanderings and ponderings I have felt that unity of thought, unity of mankind, unity in terms of even architectural expression.
So there is a vast majority of practitioners of the built environment who are constantly under the pressure and the demands of the market, and yet there is a desire to seek the intangible values. So, what are your recommendations in terms of how they can work through this kind of polarity?
Basically, I would ask each one of them to spend at least 3 or 4 days in solitude with their own self, because they have to find out. Because instead of this question is a good question, but instead of asking me that question, the questioner, if he asks himself that question, his answer will be more relevant for him. And to find that answer, he has to let and to allow the muck of restless thoughts and distractions settle. Like you have a glass full of muddy water and then you put it down and keep it like that for some time, the clean water comes up. So similarly, if this person can spend some time in solitude and ask himself or herself this question, which he has asked me or she has asked me, uh, they would definitely find an appropriate answer. What is more important for them in life? Is their priority to be in constant uh, harmony with their own life values? Or is their priority to earn more money by taking any market driven jobs? That they have to find out. Each person has to find out himself or herself. And for that, solitude is very important. Some silence and some.
And what it's an extension of this. How do you see these thoughts that negotiate between the intangible aspects and the rational percolate into schools of architecture? And
Sorry, can you repeat?
so, how do you see, in what ways do you see this negotiation between the intangible aspects and the rational processes, the demands, preparedness for the market? How does a student of architecture work through this? Of course, he can also sit in silence, but and solitude, and find out what he likes, and go out, take a break like you did in the beginning of your journey. But what are the ways in which an institution support wanderings?
Why not? I guess they can, and maybe it should become part of the syllabus, and it will help, but not too many with groups and all that, but maybe different things. This is no, and everything that is measurable is not bad. In architecture, we have to consider a lot of rational, measurable, uh, tangible aspects, without which the intangible cannot be expressed. How can the intangible be expressed? It can be expressed only through some of these tangible forms.
Right.
So we have to strike the right balance.
Perhaps the
And
internship space can.
institutions should encourage this, I guess. And this is one of the questions that I posed when I wrote a letter to all the architecture colleges in India about the architectural education and how to work on it. And I just asked questions. Can we not do this? Can we do this? Because I felt that the architectural education, as it is imparted today, is very. I it has a lot of scope for improvement. I guess.
This is my question to you. I was extremely. I really enjoyed watching all the different houses that you had showed towards the end, and the fact that you call them retreat. All of them seem to be in slightly diverse, different contexts. However, they are all retreats, right? And this COVID has pushed us to look at our domestic spaces more carefully, and these domestic spaces have become the centers of our creative practice as well. So, in what way? I mean, why is it that you have so many different homes? In what ways do these each home and each context recharge or affect your creative process?
I don't have all the places at one time. I just have my lake house now. Okay. But basically, they were the context were inspired by nature. The first thing was I liked mountains and the forest. So the first house was made on the mountains. Then it was given away, and then I decided to work on an experiment in self-sufficiency. That means whether I could live on a 5-acre piece of land, 2 hectares piece of land, in a self-sufficient manner, where I could have my own grains, I could have my own oil, I could have my own fish, crabs, or my coconuts and fruits. And this was the experiment on which I stayed for the longest time. I was there for almost 25 years in the in the foothills of the Western Ghats. Then came my fascination, again nature beckoning me, calling me, my fascination with the sea. And because I was fascinated with the sea, I decided to buy a small piece of land there and stay there. Basically, because another important thing which I would like to say today, especially to the students of architecture, is that we are blessed with this, with a very, our profession, architecture, is blessed with this possibility. Other professions can't. They are not. A doctor has to stay in his clinic all the time if he has to treat the way. He has to be there or in the OT. A lawyer also has to be in his office or in the court, or anybody else like that. But as an architect, we have this great freedom, this great blessing. Why don't we use it? I mean, like right from the beginning, when there was no COVID or anything like that, I decided to have this distance. I created this distance because I could work remotely from there and I could work better with greater productivity, with greater creativity. My first house was, I started living in Gaganbad on the mountain, in the mountain when I was 23, 23 and a half. In 1974, I started living there. And since then, I've always found the need for a place like this where I could stay uh, with nature, in the lap of nature, in solitude, and working with flexi time, flexible timings. And even by staying like this, I have designed and got built millions and millions of square feet of buildings, large campuses, everywhere. I could do that. I mean, this is what youngsters should realize: is not necessary to spend your energy in traveling 1.5 hours and 1.5 hours back to reach your office and then sit there and then go back home and tired and all that. Live a nice, full, rich life close to nature. It's possible, and today COVID has taught us that it is possible.
Yes. Yeah.
Do that. It is and without having COVID, then also I knew it was possible and I could do that. And whenever I've lectured abroad, also in some big offices and all that, they used to say, "No, how can you do that? We can't leave the office. What will happen here?" I said, "That you have to trust. You need to have some sense of trust with your employees, with your staff, and they normally would deliver. Normally, I've not faced any problems."
There is one more question that has come in. So, how do you see what is your sense of how architecture and architectural practice will change in the future, given all that you have mentioned, or in what way will it evolve?
No, I can't predict like that. It's difficult to predict because each one has to decide for himself or herself as to how they want to practice. Whether they want to get into the rut of this money making rut, or whether they want to uh, uh, work in a different way. Like I just as a extension to your question, the answer to your question, I've just read out a poem that I'd written on work. And let's say here in this case is architecture, but in work. So I'd ask, and I would ask the questioner to listen to this. Besides making a living, if our work could only teach us the art of living, not just merely a source of earning, could it also be a joy in itself, contributing towards a better quality of life? It need not only be an unending ego trip, but also include sharing with others. Can our involvement in our work become synonymous with the process of our own self-discovery? This is very important. Can our involvement in our work also become synonymous with the process of our own self-discovery? Can our work environment become a reflection of our life values? Let us ask how we feel when we reach our work environment every day. Happily excited or nonchalantly indifferent or depressed? Shouldn't our work be the manifest expression of our incessant life energy? The nature of our work may change more than once in a lifetime, but it need not ever be divorced from life's joyous spirit. So this can apply to anyone, but mainly with architects is possible. And architects have this great advantage of uh, you know, this possibility of living in the luxury of silence, luxury of nature.
Thank you so much, sir, for answers to sometimes confusing questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shirish, for that dialogue with Jain. And I think this is not really this is really the beginning of a certain process that we've begun. So I would say this dialogue that Jayant and you have had needs to now be the initiation of a certain quality of conversation that percolates into schools of architecture.
True.
So it's not about, a 1 hour dialogue and it's on a book. It's not that spirit at all. Because these webinars have been actually a threshold to begin a conversation into the schools of architecture. And in the last 6 webinars we've had, different schools have kind of come forward, uh, imbibed and brought it into the studio, looked at the studio program in greater depth with the kind of book they've engaged with. So the book really, or the insights, become an inspiration or a provocation so that students may agree or even disagree. It's not like everyone should agree with what is being stated. And sometimes in the disagreement itself, another realization comes.
Right. Yes.
And because then there's a reference of some kind. So it is not about agreeing and it's not about everyone being on the same page. It's not really like that. It's about a dialogue. It's about a reference point. And I'm sure it happened in your own experience, and where when we begin to wander or when we begin to travel across different cultures, absorb different cultures, at some level they become our references. They become our references.
Yes.
Could be permanent, temporary, they take on various values. And I think that's what the book reflects, that these become an intrinsic reference. Then whether someone believes in the universal or someone believes in the particular and that there are diverse cultures coexisting, or someone may see an underlying connection, someone may say there is no underlying connection. I think that's the kind of discourse or dialogue we would like to open within schools of architecture, because then it gives them the freedom to ask those questions.
Yes.
The freedom, one need not all the time say that we are. Of course, schools have a choice to say it, but that need not be the only dialogue, that it has to be a market-driven school, or understand what a market-driven relevant architect is about.
Rather, it would help them also to understand the various multiple contexts that need to be addressed in our designs.
Absolutely. So there are multiple contexts
Mm.
and also multiple attitudes and positions that an architect can take. So it is not really the practice of architecture as much as the architecture of practice. So I think how one kind of imagines a practice. How does an architect engage with oneself as well with society? How does an architect take a decision on inhabiting space as well as shaping space in a certain way? How does an architect look at the notion of communication, community, culture, history? And I think these are all the act of sketching. What does sketching do to an architect, his own inner mind? And I think these are the questions that the book raised. When I'm grateful that you sent me a copy very early, and of course our school also received a copy recently. So I think these are the questions that it has raised, and these are the questions that the students have raised in our own school also. And we do hope that there are already about 4 or 5 schools that are keen to look at this dimension beyond the build form. It doesn't mean negate the build form. It means that the build form may be a background or a starting point to really look at something more
Yes.
holistic and much larger.
Yes.
Otherwise, we tend to get caught with the build form and just the formal dimension, the visual dimension, the functional dimension, and forget that there are many other layers to this engagement with space, engagement with architecture, engagement with the possibilities of what practice can allow for an architect.
Yes.
And this series was initiated so that young architects and schools of architecture realize that there is not really one way of practicing, that there are so many diverse directions that one can take, that there are so many diverse possibilities at the end of 5 years. And I think this conversation, this presentation, and of course the book, some schools have received it. We hope the others will receive it, or may have already received it. And I hope this is what it will open simultaneously. And the last 1 year has been radically strange, that many of us may have seen it as strange, or many of us may have tried to make it life as usual despite the strangeness. Again, is a choice. But at one level, it has definitely had some deeper impact on all of us, that uh, this is actually an architectural disease, the quarantine, where you say, if you say social distancing, or you confine yourself, or you say wandering is restricted for a year because of some fear of whatever that we don't know. I think it is the root of this quarantine is architecture. And we made the root of the quarantine some virus. Actually, the root of the quarantine is architecture. And I think we should have really looked at that more deeper in the schools. And I think this book will, in that sense, provoke that kind of a conversation. That the wandering need not necessarily mean that I'm traveling every day and I'm going to New York and Japan and coming back every evening. It's not that kind of a. It is more one which is reflective, which one travels, which one absorbs. There's a certain pace to that wandering, and so that wandering is also not only an external wandering; it's also a thought process. It's a thought process. It's a reflection, which also is growing while one is traveling. And I think how this happens for diverse architects is again. So we would, after this, engage in several other talks where architects are talking about their own experiences of travel, or where they went, or so I think those are the other talks that are going to unfold. So on that note, Shirish, if you have, because we will, so I don't take this as, while we are attempting to conclude, it's almost 2 hours that we've engaged in here. But so while we are trying to conclude, I would say this is really not a conclusion, but the beginning.
Right.
It's really a beginning to the next stage. And I would hope once schools come forward to the council and suggest that they are imbibing it within their semester, either at third year level, it could be second year level, or even a first year foundation course, or final level. We would look forward to yourself and Jayant and Lakshmi coming in at some point into these schools briefly. I mean, we are also trying to see that it doesn't take a lot of time, so that the time is there, but some kind of dialogue with the schools as they delve into these issues in their own way. So this could become the context to start it, but they could they have the liberty to delve with it in their own way and bring up certain fundamental questions that equip an architect in this act of inhabitation, inhabitation and the delineating of space, if one can put it in a more direct way. Because in the absence of any delineation of space, there's no act of making a boundary or defining something which is the beginning point of architecture in a certain sense. So, Shirish, would you have some closing comments before we close? And because there are several school heads who are texting me or there and who like we have even architects from Germany who have texted me just now, and so they are also watching. So I think we have quite that's the potential of a digital media is We can have somebody Germany in the same room as us, and so
Yeah.
this room has no boundary also. And we can have someone in Sri Lanka watching us at the same time. It's night in Sri Lanka and morning in Paris, and they're all watching. So we cannot even say good night or good morning. That's the other risk of this platform or possibility of this platform. So on that form, would you like to kind of give some concluding thoughts and then we can close? And I open it up to faculty, students, heads of schools to write into the COA social team. Those who wish, there are already 4 heads who have already spoken yesterday on this idea. So we are looking at how that can unfold. But if others also, other schools are there who would like to kind of take this book as a provocation within the studio and engage it in a more deeper way with the students, I think then we have a good beginning with this kind of a conversation. So, Shirish, would you like to kind of sum it? And Jen, thank you very much for that dialogue and agreeing to kind of initiate this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
Shirish,
these
should have some summary.
these wanderings and wanderings could be in our architectural language also. They could be interpreted as the outer space and the inner space. And our scriptures also, right from the beginning, they have dealt with this issue of space in a very beautiful way, which I'm trying to also explore through my film. But they call the outer space, which is the tangible, measurable, physical space, a functional space, as Bhutakash. And the inner space within our subconscious, within our minds, is called the Chidakash or the Chitakash, which is intangible, immeasurable, and yeah, intangible and immeasurable. Now, in architecture, I feel it is very important to understand the relationship between these two. And both these spaces are always interacting and influencing each other. As you would see that when you move around in the city today, in the other streets, what kind of space do you see? What kind of buildings do you see? We see only holdings and things like that. And so that outer space is an expression of our society's inner space, which has become greedy and commercial. Similarly, the the outer space has been affected by the inner space. Sometimes, many times, the outer space also affects our inner space. Like when we go to the nature in the mountains or to the seashore, that outer space has an impact on our inner space, and our inner space becomes quiet or tranquil, something like. Or even in that Roingy's temple courtyard, the tourists are all talking yakety yak yakety yak in the buses and all that. And once they get down and come to that space in of that courtyard with the raked sand and those rocks in that Roingy Zen monastery, everybody quietens and sits there. So so let us not think of architecture as elevational compositions, which are just skin deep, but let us think of architecture as the right balance and the right marriage between the inner space and our outer space. And in the scriptures, it also says that the person who can harmonize his inner space with the outer space, or the outer space with his inner space, is called a saradaya. They call him a saradaya. So this is what I would like to say, and also maybe I would like to end my talk with a couple of quotes, not mine, but it was a writer called Vance Packard who wrote. I read 2 books of his long, long back, The Waste Makers and The Status Seekers. He talks about the American society, and he dedicates his book. He says, "I dedicate this book to my parents who did not confuse a good life with the number of goods they had." So let us do that. And secondly, this is also somebody else's quote, but it says that let us not measure our life by the number of breaths which we take, but by the moments in our lives which take our breath away. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirish, and thank you, Jane, for that conversation. Thank you, Lakshmi, for coming in. And I think we will get back to you all very soon. We are not going to
Sure.
let you
Hey,
off as
we would like to
easily.
take this forward
Yes, I think
at a mutually convenient time and date for all of us.
sure, sure. So I think now that the book has also reached all the schools of architecture,
Yes, it has reached.
and I think that was a graceful, gracious gesture on your part, Shirish, that the book has to reach all the schools of architecture. I think it has been gifted to all the schools of
Yes.
architecture. So that I think that becomes a good starting point to start a conversation around the book in the studios. And so we will come back to as schools initiate the dialogue for the next semester. And on that note, I would like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank the council. Uh,
I wish Habib was here.
he just
Habib,
texted me. I think he's in the security. He's just flying exactly at the same time. There's a change in flight, and he did attempt to log in from the security check, but he couldn't get through. So he
okay.
just texted me. So I think anyway, this
He can
recording
see.
remains.
Yeah, he can see.
Also, this recording remains
Yeah,
as a kind of a repository in the archives of the council
yes.
for open reference at all times. So thank you again, Shirish, for that
Thank
wonderful,
you. Thank you, Durganan.
insightful conversation, and thank you, Jayan, for kind of engaging in that conversation, and Lakshmi for bringing in that element of questions and opening it up in a certain way. So let's continue this further while we close for now. I think let us kind of continue this further as it kind of engages with the other schools. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
all
to the
the
participants.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.